Hello, everyone. Hope you all are having a great weekend. I am not. My Giants once again took another L today. No surprise, although it sucks to lose to a team like the Bears with a quarterback like Trubisky. But it is what it is. They tried to come back at the end, but I think we just don't have the talent. And Saquon going down isn't going to make it any better, unfortunately. And the Giants are just the masters of shooting themselves in the foot, where they just put themselves in a hole. They basically spot the other team points, and it doesn't matter like how heroic your comebacks are at the end. It's like, dude, you put yourselves in a hole, and you're just making it harder on yourself. So cut out the mistakes, and we'd at least be like an 8-8 team. But we keep making big mistakes, and it's just putting ourselves in a hole. So, I'm just happy that Tom Coughlin and Eli Manning can't get blamed for it anymore. It's like, alright, you said get rid of them and it would magically fix everything. What now? What now? But anyway, before I get into the video, a couple announcements on future videos. First of all, the second episode of Weekday Warriors of Wrestling, the podcast that I do with co-host Eric Clancy, has been posted over on that YouTube channel. I will provide links to that, so if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, go ahead and do so. And I think it was a really good show. I think it was one of our better ones that we've done. It's the best one we've done since we've been on YouTube. The second episode is the best one we've done since we've been on YouTube. But in any case, I really enjoyed doing that show, so I highly recommend checking that one out if you haven't already. And my next Star Wars book review, the Young Jedi Knight series, my original plan for that series, and I had planned to get part 1 of that series out a couple weeks ago. But I blasted through those books so quickly because they turned out to be such quick reads that I thought, you know what? I'll finish the series and just review the entire series, all 14 books, in one video, because they are such quick reads and they are somewhat simple in their approach. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just the nature of how they are and what they're intended to be, that I don't see any point to split it out into 3 different videos. So I think sometime next week I will have my Young Jedi Knight series review up. So that's it with that. So now it's time to focus on this video, which is my next Nitro Retrospective, which will cover the first half of 1998. And I have been dying to do this one because so much happened during this period, both good and bad, that I'm going to go off on some wild tangents here. I don't know where this video is going to take me, but we'll see how it goes, because I'm just going to kind of go off the cuff with a lot of this and just talk about some of the things I liked a lot and some of the things I really, really did not like. So, without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started. So, at this period, we're coming off the heels of Starrcade 97 with that fantastically well-built Hogan vs. Sting main event that unfortunately suffered from poor execution. But Sting was the champion. Coming out of that event, unfortunately, there was further controversy with a rematch that Hogan and Sting had on Nitro the very next night. So the title was held up, and that's where we are coming into 1998. Other changes are coming in WCW. There's a rift in the NWO that begins with Kevin Nash and Randy Savage kind of breaking away from Hollywood Hulk Hogan. We would see how that would pay off in a few months. But in WCW's very structure, big things were going to change. Changes that I felt negatively impacted the company's long-term creative possibilities, and ultimately the decisions that were made during this period were what led to them ultimately losing the Monday Night War and ultimately going out of business. Again, and I've said this before, I said it when I talked about Starrcade 97, WWF was getting hot anyway, so I don't think if Starrcade 97 had been executed perfectly that it would have been the death nail in WWF, because it completely ignores the fact that they were getting Tyson, they were getting, Steve Austin was red hot and was becoming the top star in wrestling, and The Rock was coming along, and they actually did get a bit of hype from the Bret Hart situation and the Montreal Screwjob. So, I'm not saying if WCW hadn't have done these things, like WWF wouldn't have started beating them in the ratings, but I think WCW could have survived if they hadn't done these certain things that they ended up doing. And during this period, the 6 months, we're going from January to June of 1998, a lot of things happened that negatively impacted the WCW long-term creatively and production-wise. The overall model of the company. And I narrowed it down to 3 things that really, really hurt WCW big time. And we're going to get the negative out of the way first, so let's just go ahead and do it. On the smaller end of that, one thing that really hurt was the explosion of the tag team division, where they just pretty much nuked it. It felt like during this period, this was when the tag team division really fell apart. The Outsiders, who were like the top 2 stars of the tag team ranks for the NWO, they ultimately split up, and I'm going to elaborate on that more in a little bit. The Steiner brothers split up when Scott Steiner joined the NWO. Harlem Heat broke up, which happened when Stevie Ray got injured and Booker got his singles run, and then Stevie Ray ultimately joined the NWO, pretty much effectively putting an end to Harlem Heat. I think Public Enemy was gone by this point. It just felt like a lot of teams were just lost in the shuffle during this point, and the tag team division became more and more non-existent. And you got stuck in this weird situation where the Wolfpack and the NWO, more on the Wolfpack in a little bit, were fighting over control of the tag team championships. And by the end of this period, it felt like tag team wrestling was just dead in WCW, when that was something that they could hang their hat on. I've talked about it before, but you've got the Steiners and Harlem Heat and the Faces of Fear and even Mortis and Wrath and those guys having these hard-hitting, cool matches, and I was like, man, this is pretty neat. And by this point, there was almost nothing, just non-existent, especially losing the Steiner brothers in particular, and losing Harlem Heat in particular, even though we did get Big Papa Pump out of it, and we did get Booker T finally breaking out as a single star. Losing those tag teams without anything to really replace it really hurt the tag team division in the long run. Now, WCW could still be a financial success without a tag team division, but it's one major thing that was lost during this period, and one thing that, one negative that I could take away from creative. Another really bad thing that happened during this time was overexposure, and this is probably the biggest problem, to be perfectly honest, in the long run. This is probably the biggest mistake that WCW made during this point, because this is when Thunder reared its ugly head, and they had to get a second 2-hour show in the middle of the week. And I've talked about it before, but I felt the same way when SmackDown showed up in 99, where I used to, waiting for the next episode of Raw in 1998 was it killed me, because the anticipation and the wait for that next episode of Raw was just insane. And even when they brought out Sunday Night Heat was ultimately a preview for Monday Night Raw, basically. So it didn't really, kind of like what AEW Dark is now, where you watch it on YouTube and it's kind of like a way to kind of whet your appetite right before Dynamite, which is why a second show for AEW scares the hell out of me, because I think we're going to run into this problem. When you add a second show in the middle of the week, it cuts that anticipation in half. And I think WWF did it better than WCW did with Thunder, but it's still it cuts into that anticipation by giving us more. You're actually diluting the product, and you really felt that here, where you put Thunder in the middle of the week, and then all of a sudden Nitro doesn't seem as important. Nitro doesn't have that ooh, I've got to see what happens, because you see what happens just a few days later. If you're not waiting as long for it, that anticipation isn't there. And I think that was a big, big hit to WCW. Also, it forces them to go back to the same wells over and over and over again, to where they run the well dry. How many big matches and how many big tag team matches with main eventers can you do on TV twice a week? It just overexposes everything, and it must have been a pain in the ass to produce all that content. And also, this is the period where Nitro started to go 3 hours permanently. They had experimented with it in the second half of 1997 with a couple 3-hour specials. But now Nitro was going to be 3 hours every week, and I'm like, oh my god. So now we've gone from 2 hours a week of grade A content. There were other shows like Worldwide and Saturday Night, but they weren't must-see shows. They were just kind of here's something to kind of keep you busy while you wait for the big show that actually matters. Now it's like you've got a second show that's almost as big as Nitro in the middle of the week, and now Nitro's even longer, so you've gone from 2 hours to 5 just overnight, and it's like, that's going to kill the show. And sure enough, it did, because who the hell can produce that much live content so quickly? And Thunder, I don't think Thunder was live. I think it was taped earlier in the day or something like that. But still, it's... or it may have been taped after Nitro, I'm not sure. But still, I mean, that's a lot of content to produce weekly. And it becomes a burden on the audience to kind of keep up with all of that stuff. And like I said, I think WWE's done it even worse now, where it's like, Jesus Christ, they've got so much programming. I don't even bother trying to keep up with all of it. But it's I think that was a huge misstep on WCW's part. Now, we're going to go back more into the creative side of things and the stuff that you see on the in front of the camera, and some of the biggest problems that they had creatively. And this really started to rear its ugly head in kind of April, like Spring Stampede 98 time, when the NWO split was fully executed. Now, when you split things into Hollywood and Wolfpack, and I know ultimately the goal was for the NWO to get its own show, and for it to have its own show that would thrive, you have to have some kind of a split in the NWO. So I think it was like, there's a nugget of a good idea in there, they just never fully executed it, and the Wolfpack never fully lived up to what I think it was supposed to be. And I've talked about this in previous videos, but I personally feel like the Wolfpack is it's the coolest bad idea in the history of professional wrestling, and it's not even, that's probably a bad way to phrase it, it's not even a bad idea, it's just a poorly executed idea. Where an NWO Civil War is actually a good idea, but the Wolfpack just never quite worked for a bunch of reasons that I'm going to get into. But I'll never understand, I talked about splitting up tag teams, but to this day I'll never understand how Scott Hall, who was going through some severe personal problems at the time, but I'll never understand why they thought that Hall should be on the Hollywood side and Nash should be on the Wolfpack side. It's like, dude, Hall should be with Nash regardless of, I mean, great, yes, he has personal issues and everything that's keeping him off TV, but it's like, dude, Hall should be on the Nash side of things, just for this to make any kind of sense. And I'll talk about more of the specific members in a little bit, but the Wolfpack, it felt like it almost felt like something that was snake bit, where Randy Savage got hurt, Sting got hurt, and that came later in the year, but they took Miss Elizabeth away from them and put her right back in Hollywood. They had Hennig and Rude, and then they took them away and put them right back in Hollywood. And by the end of it, it was really just Nash, Conan, and Lex Luger, and that was it. That was the NWO Wolfpack. But I will say this: the merch was awesome. I had a Wolfpack T-shirt back in the day. The merch was awesome, and the theme song kicked so much ass. So it's like, it's the coolest poorly executed idea in the history of professional wrestling. And to this day, I'll never understand how late in '98 we never got a Wolfpack versus Hollywood, who's the true NWO type of payoff to this. And the fact that that never happened, I think, is ridiculous. And there are certain members that probably would have worked better in the Wolfpack that didn't get to join the Wolfpack, and there are certain members that could have worked in Hollywood and didn't go to Hollywood or whatever. They just didn't do a very good job of deciding who should go where. And that really leads into my biggest problem, where if you're going to do an NWO Civil War, we got to bolster up both sides so they both seem like a threat. Wolfpack got hurt by the injury bug and bad creative, but in an attempt to bolster them, they added Lex Luger to the group, which Lex Luger prior to this had been one of the heroes of WCW. And I talked about this in my previous Nitro retrospectives, where I really had to go back and reevaluate Luger's entire career. Watching his run in 96, 97, I was like, you know what? Luger was one of the most over guys in the company. I think he deserves a lot more credit than he gets for how over he got, how he got the torture rack over, and how he became one of WCW's beacons of hope. And I think the match with Hogan on the 100th episode is the peak of his career. Personally, I think it's one of Luger's greatest accomplishments, that he was a part of something that felt as big as that. His theme song sucked, which was really the only problem with it, but other than that, great look, got the finisher over, and he was successfully able to be that rah-rah, go-get-em type of hero that WCW needed. Unfortunately, like I said, he had peaked with the Hogan victory. And then once he dropped the title back to Hogan, it was kind of like he was on an island, or he was on the outside looking in. I mean, and Sting kind of took his place as like the big hero. And so when he joined the Wolfpack, I'm like, all right, I'm not a fan of like one of WCW's biggest heroes joining any version of the NWO, even if it is the babyface version, which is the Wolfpack. But Luger was kind of floundering at that point, and he needed a shot in the arm, and I thought, okay, we'll let him join the Wolfpack. The one I don't understand, and I will not forgive, is Sting. And yes, Sting in the red face paint looked great. It's a great look for Sting. But Sting was like, as much as I just put over Luger as one of the rah-rah go-get-em heroes of WCW, Sting was that times 1,000. He was the one guy that the NWO could not beat. And this is coming off the heels of Starrcade 97, where at least he walked out of there with the belt. He beat Hogan again at Super Brawl 8, I think that event was, and ultimately dropped the title to Savage, who then dropped it to Hogan, as per usual. But for a while, Sting was like the hero of WCW, and him joining with any version of the Wolfpack felt so wrong. And felt like such a misstep. It felt like they put him there because they just wanted the Wolfpack to feel like a big deal. When really, Sting never felt like he fit in any version of the NWO. And I was never a fan of it. Even though he did look cool in the getup, and even though the Wolfpack had a cool theme song, and even though there was a lot going for it on the merch side of things, the sight of Sting wearing an NWO t-shirt just never felt right to me, and felt like a huge misunderstanding of what that character was supposed to be. That's just my take. Actually, the one who fit the best of the people they added to the Wolfpack was probably Conan, who really came to life as kind of like the hype man for the Wolfpack. So, probably the best run of Conan's entire career, but he kind of became like the road dog Jesse James of the NWO Wolfpack, but on the other side of the aisle, we have NWO Hollywood, which really kept all the thugs and all the jobber types. And then it was like Hogan and Steiner on top as like the two top guys in that group. But where they really messed up, and I creatively just blew my mind, especially reliving all of these old Nitros. The biggest one is Bret Hart. The biggest mistake, and it confuses me to this day, because a lot of people say that they misused Bret Hart from the very beginning. Him being a referee at Starrcade, not the best, but at least it paints Bret Hart as being against the NWO, so I'm like, okay, I can let that slide. It's not the best thing on the planet, but I can let it slide. Then they give him a big pay-per-view match with Ric Flair where he goes over. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then he starts targeting NWO members one by one, starting with, I think Bryan Adams was one of them that he went after first. And it was like, okay, he's on a path that's going to lead him to Hogan. We got to get to Bret and Hogan. And initially, it felt like he was going down that path. Like I said, he was targeting NWO members one by one. And they even did a thing on Nitro where he ran out and saved Jim Neidhart and Davey Boy Smith. And you're thinking, ooh, are they going to do like a Hart Foundation type thing in WCW? Which I think Vince sent them a cease and desist that prevented them from doing that. But in any case, it felt like Bret Hart was on the path to eventually cross paths and have that pay-per-view match with Hulk Hogan, which would have been huge. And then in around April or May, somewhere around that time, they turn Bret Hart heel and have him be buddies with Hulk Hogan. And they do that weird thing where it's like he's kind of in the NWO, but not really. And he's friends with Hogan, but he's not truly a member of the NWO, which was just confusing and made absolutely no sense. And completely derailed Bret Hart. And it was like, oh, shit. They ruined it. And huge creative misstep. One of the biggest mistakes that WCW made during this time, because initially Bret felt like one of the top faces in the company, and then that all went right down the drain when they did that, because they just had to have him in the NWO, even though he wasn't really in the NWO. Again, it confuses me to this day. I don't even know how to explain it. But it didn't work. It was a huge mishandling of Bret Hart, who was one of their big acquisitions. And it completely derailed us from getting Bret versus Hogan or any of those big pay-per-view matches that we possibly would have wanted. We did get Bret and Sting at Halloween Havoc, but other than that, it just felt like a complete mishandling of somebody who should have been treated a lot better given his ability, given his intrigue coming out of the WWF. There are a lot better things to do with Bret Hart than having him join the NWO, especially since they already did that bit in late 97 when he first came on board, and they did the whole thing, is he going to join the NWO? And then he said no. I was like, all right, question answered. We're good. We don't need to revisit it. And they did, and they double backed on it. And I was like, oh, fuck. What did you do? And the other one that disappointed me, less so than Bret Hart, but still a massive disappointment, was when they had the Giant rejoin the NWO. And I've talked about this before, where in 97, the Giant had one of the all-time great redemption arcs for any, like, heel-turned babyface in the history of wrestling, where he never really turned face from his Dungeon of Doom days or like his World Champion days in 96. But he was kind of a de facto face by default because he wasn't in the NWO. And then he joined the NWO, and it's like, oh shit, they've got the big Giant now on their side. They're unstoppable. And then eventually came to a point where he won World War III, and he gets the title shot against Hogan, and he wants that title shot, and Hogan's trying to duck him, and it eventually leads to him being ousted from the NWO. So now he's kind of a man all alone, where he wants to destroy the NWO for screwing him over, but WCW is not willing to have him back in the fold because he betrayed them. And Lex Luger is the guy that extends his hand. It's like, you know what, I'll forgive you. You can come back on board with us. And they form that tag team that got over, and much to my surprise, it's like, dude, this is one of the best, like, thrown together singles tag teams I've ever seen. Like, you know, when you think of those type of teams, you think of, like, the Mega Powers, you think of the Rock and Sock Connection, you think of, on the heel side of things, you think of, like, Owen Hart and Yokozuna, or Owen Hart and British Bulldogs, you know, that type of stuff. When you think of, like, two single stars, it's like, we don't really know what to do with them, so just throw them together and see what happens. Here, because of the Giants' whole, like, road to redemption, the Luger Giant tag team worked exceptionally well, and it allowed the fans an opportunity to forgive the Giant for what he had done, and it created some great moments. It's just unfortunate we never got that. Well, we got Nash and Giant one-on-one. It sold out 98, and it unfortunately had a terrible ending because of that botched powerbomb, but it's just unfortunate that Nash and Giant never really got to have that big blow-off match on pay-per-view, because I think that would have benefited him greatly. It should have happened in Starrcade 97. It didn't. But in any case, the Giant was like one of the best baby faces in the company at that point. And again, like I said about Luger, he's one of those guys I had to reevaluate his entire run in WCW. Rewatching it was like, the Giant's a lot better than I remembered him being. And he was just really good at being a Giant initially, and then you throw all that creative on top of it where he gets that redemption arc, and I'm like, yeah, Giant's one of my guys. I'm loving the Giant. I'm digging this guy. And then when you have him rejoin the NWO Hollywood, the group that he left and rebelled against, it just felt like such a huge backtrack, and it undermined him so much. And their excuse for doing it is that he just hated Kevin Nash so much that he rejoined the NWO just to fuck with the Wolfpack, because Kevin Nash was the head of that group. And to which I say, I mean, they could have done something where they extended Wolfpack membership to him, and he told them to go fuck themselves, because Luger would have been the guy to try to get him on board with the Wolfpack, and John's like, no, fuck Nash, I'm not working with those guys, screw that. And unfortunately, that's what you get. So a bunch of characters got ruined. Like Sting got derailed, Bret got derailed, the Giant got derailed, all because they needed to add bodies to this NWO Civil War. And it's so disappointing, because those names I just listed are among the top faces and top stars in the company at that point. Former world champions. Bret Hart, huge acquisition. Sting was the big hero in 97. Giant, one of the big heroes in 97. And also got hurt at Sold Out, which added to the sympathy for him. And then they pretty much just did away with that. The entire thing just felt like a huge misfire. And when you combine all that with the extension of the program, with adding an extra hour to Nitro, then adding a 2-hour Thunder weekly, and the destruction of the tag team division, a lot of stuff went wrong in 1998, and that's piling up like the injury bug, like what happened to Randy Savage. Right as like the NWO Hollywood versus Wolfpack thing was really firing up, and they lose one of their big mouthpieces and their big stars in Randy Savage, which might be, now that I look back on it, that might be why they never was a Wolfpack versus Hollywood War Games match, because it's like, look, Savage got hurt. Sting got hurt. You know, it's like, it's probably why that didn't happen, because it's just, the Wolfpack itself just kind of crumbled for a ton of different reasons. But, very unfortunate that everything went down the way that it did. And the dents in the armor of WCW could definitely be seen during this period. Again, too much programming, bad creative, makes for a bad mix. Now, does that mean I completely hated this entire period for 1998 in WCW? Absolutely not. There's a lot of stuff here that I actually really enjoyed, and that's why it's one of the most conflicting periods for me, because it's one where they make some of their biggest mistakes, but they also do some of the stuff that I absolutely love the most from WCW's history. So this 6-month period is very conflicting for me, because it's there's a lot of really good, enjoyable stuff here, but they made such huge mistakes that hurt them in the long run, that it's a complicated period, to say the least. So, what were some of the things that I really liked? Well, let's start with the Cruiserweight division. This is probably the best period for the Cruiserweight division. In WCW's entire history, and the history of that division, I would say that this is probably the best period, because Chris motherfucking Jericho became the man during this period. And throughout this Nitro retrospective, I've been talking about Babyface Jericho and how much he sucked. I hated Babyface Jericho during this period, but once he gets that Cruiserweight belt and he starts feuding with Juventud Guerrera, taking his mask away, injuring Rey Mysterio, and then starts that fantastic feud with Dean Malenko, which I think is the greatest feud in the history of the Cruiserweight division, one of the greatest feuds in WCW history. Jericho became like a star, a bona fide star, one of the best things on the program overnight. He brought entertainment. This was the period of the Stinko Malenko and the list with the 1004 holds, and the Loophole King, where he would lose, but then he would find a way to like exercise some loophole to get out of it and save the title. And when he would lose, he would go to the Library of Congress and do things like that. That's the Jericho that really came to life for me, where I realized, okay, this guy's got something. This guy is great. And this, to me, is the period where Jericho really came to life as a performer. And when you have a strong heel and such a hateable asshole, who's also entertaining, but he's just like, you just want to see that piece of shit get punched in the mouth, it really gives a nice direction for the entire division, because everybody wants to beat the shit out of him, whether it be Rey Mysterio, Juventud Guerrera, or Dean Malenko, who, again, that pop in the Battle Royal, anybody who remembers that, when he took off the Cyclope mask and it was Dean Malenko, one of the best pops I've ever seen for anything, and one of the best, like, wow, the fans get the story! It's great! One of those type of moments. So, anybody who thinks that the Cruiserweight division is just all action, there's no story at all, I point to 1998 as the big evidence against that assumption, because Jericho was absolutely fantastic and was the crown jewel of the Cruiserweight division during this point, and gave it the direction that set it apart from everything else, because it wasn't NWO centered. It was allowed to kind of be its own thing. And what you got was Jericho just being able to take the spotlight and make the most out of it, and, in my opinion, become the greatest Cruiserweight champion that WCW ever had. Largely because of what he was able to do as a heel. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So, I really love that. Then you get the TV title situation. And the big story with the TV title is Booker T, who got his big singles run and would ultimately get his first singles championship, which was the WCW TV Championship, and he would go on to be one of the better TV champions for WCW, and this would eventually lead him to crossing paths with one Chris Benoit, where they would be embroiled in this feud for the TV title. Fit Finlay was holding the belt at this point, and to determine who would get the shot against Fit Finlay, they would have their legendary Best of 7 series to determine who should get the title shot against Fit Finlay. And my oh my, if you have not seen those matches, I highly recommend them. They are definitely worth the look. And one of the better match series I've ever seen, like when you get those Best of series, it's one of the better ones I've ever seen. The only other one I would think of that comes close to it would be the Beer Money Motor City Machine Guns Best of 5 that they did in TNA, and that one was gimmick to holy hell. That was just gimmick match on top of gimmick match, and all of them were great, but it was a bunch of gimmick matches. Here, it's just two guys wrestling, and they have to find a way to do different things and reference earlier matches and build off of those matches in every single situation, and I thought they did a fantastic job of that, culminating with the match at the Great American Bash, which was superb, and when I did my top 10 Great American Bash match video, that match was on there, and it was an easy pick for me. It's like, that match has got to be on there. It's one of the greatest matches in Great American Bash history. But so I loved all that stuff, and it really goes to show, like, when you have a deep roster and you're able to put stuff together and create situations that people care about, the third tier singles championship really feels like a big deal when you've got Booker T and Chris Benoit fighting for it. Fighting for a shot at that title. Really, it really paints a big picture. And during this period, this was the period where Booker T really came into his own, and you started to see like the single star potential in Booker T. And man, that young Booker, man, he was a hoss, but he could also fly too. So he was just a remarkable athlete to watch. And I loved the TV title stuff that you saw during this period. And also the U.S. title. I referenced Chris Benoit earlier, but he closed out 97 in a feud with Raven. And that transitioned into them getting roped into the U.S. title contendership with One Diamond Dallas Page, where they had a couple of three-way matches and then singles matches involving everybody. Diamond Dallas Page got his first major singles title at Starrcade 97. And DDP was one of the biggest baby faces, one of the most over baby faces, with the most over finisher in wrestling at that point, although Goldberg had kind of taken that over. More on Goldberg in a little bit. But it was nice to see DDP get that moment to shine. And when you put him in there with unique talents like Chris Benoit and Raven, and all three of them are so different from each other, you're going to get a lot of good stuff out of that. And a lot of the build-ups for those matches and the matches themselves were really, really good stuff. And again, I think it's one of those situations where it's a bunch of people that contrast with each other, and because they contrast, they complement each other, because they make up for each other's, like, okay, DDP, not the best ground wrestler in the world, so you got Chris Benoit to make up for that, and then you've got Raven, who's the best talker out of all three of them, and he makes up for the fact that Chris Benoit can't really talk, and DDP's more of a babyface, so he can't say, like, the super interesting things that Raven can say, and they just, all three of them complemented each other so well, and the series of matches that they had were very enjoyable, and the build-up to those matches were very enjoyable. It made the U.S. title seem like a really big deal as a result of all of that. So it was nice to see my boy DDP get that big run. It was nice to see Raven get a big push as well, because Raven, I heard him mention in a shoot interview once that the Flock, which also helped Raven tremendously because he had a bunch of foot soldiers that he could just throw at whatever enemy was in his path. But Raven, and the whole concept of the Flock, Raven had mentioned once that it was the most over group of all time that never won any of the big matches. And I think that's mostly true. I can't think of a group that got as over as the Flock did and hardly ever won any matches. I mean, when you look at, like, Lodi, Kidman, who's on the higher end of the standing of the members of the Flock, Reese, Sick Boy, Van Hammer, those guys, they didn't win that much, but somehow their Flock got over, and it makes me wish they had done more with it. And, it makes me wonder, that War Games they did in 98 later in the year, it's like, what if they had actually pushed the Flock as, like, a big threat? And you've got NWO Wolfpack, you've got NWO Hollywood, you've got a Team WCW, and you've got the Flock. And you've got all four factions against each other in a War Games match. It's like, if they had done that, holy shit, it would have been crazy. It would have been absolutely insane. And also during this period, 1998, I mentioned a lot of the singles titles and what they meant to certain guys like Jericho and Malenko and DDP and Raven and Benoit and Booker T. But a bunch of single stars started to kind of come out of their shells here. Big Papa Pump Scott Steiner would join up with Buff Bagwell, and I think they complemented each other very, very well. Bagwell, unfortunately, would get the neck injury, which kind of slowed his progress as a potential, like, shit heel to help out the bigger stars like Big Papa Pump. And Big Papa Pump would go on to be, like, one of the big names in the NWO. And I've put him over before. I love Scott Steiner. Unironically, I love Scott Steiner. His promos and the way he carries himself, I just think he's a hoot. And I just love watching the guy. And I make no apologies for that. I absolutely adore Scott Steiner. And I always have a blast going back and watching his old stuff, whether it be his Steiner Brothers stuff, whether it be his stuff from Japan, whether it be his NWO stuff. Even his TNA stuff I really like. It's like, yes, he's older at this point, but he's like, He'll throw a Frankensteiner out there once in a while. It's fun to watch. I enjoy it. And also, Canyon comes back at this point, and I'm going to put over Canyon here because the Mortis character had pretty much been dropped by this point, and Canyon, I think, was a great worker. Like, he really was a great worker, and was a guy that probably deserved more of a push than he ever got. I think people don't give him the credit that he deserves for being a great talent. Go back and watch some of his stuff. He is a great talent that can work with just about anybody, whether it be Raven or Saturn or DDP or anybody you put him in the ring with, Glacier, even that stuff, because I put it over last time. I actually did enjoy some of the Glacier, Mortis, and Wrath stuff. So, I like Canyon, and God rest his soul, because it was really sad to lose him, especially under those circumstances. But I think he's a guy that deserved more success than he got. Not saying he should have been world champion or anything like that, but it's like he could have been a really strong mid-carder for years and years and years and years, and he just never... It just didn't really happen for him, which is unfortunate. And then he went to WWE, and then we all know what happened there. But it is what it is. So I'm checking my notes here to see if there's anything else interesting. Oh, one other thing that happened, we got a lot of these weird, like, cross-generational matches that I thought were interesting, because Rick Martel came on at this point, and he started working with the likes of Booker T for the TV title. We got Chris Benoit versus Marty Jannetty at one point, which that was a hell of a thing to see. It's like, damn, this feels like... Because Jannetty and Benoit feel like they are from completely different eras, and I guess they are, but... this late 90s period is pretty much like the end for a lot of the 80s guys and the beginning for a lot of those like post turn of the century guys. So it was really interesting to see matchups like that. And I'm checking to see, is there anything else I'm missing as far as, because I feel like there's a bunch of stuff that happened during this period. Oh, we also got the excitement of Karl Malone and Dennis Rodman joining the mix. This is towards the end of this period is when we started to see them really get involved in the programming to build their big match for Bash at the Beach 1998, which is one of the coolest celebrity interactions, celebrity matches in the history of pro wrestling, at least in terms of the build-up and all the things surrounding it. And, man, wrestling will never be this cool ever again, where you have two guys that were in the fucking NBA championship immediately coming off the heels of that and then immediately going to wrestle each other on a fucking pay-per-view. That to me is insane as I say that out loud, but it's like, it really points to like, dude, wrestling was cool as shit back then. And even during this heavily flawed period in WCW's history, to see Karl Malone, the mailman, and Dennis Rodman, one of the bad boy, the worm, part of the championship Chicago Bulls on WCW television. That's insane. Absolutely insane. And now I'm thinking, will society ever be as cool as it was back then? Because I'm trying to think, all right, who would the athletes be today that would be awesome if they just showed up on WWE or AEW TV? I can't think of anybody. Like, I guess LeBron James, but LeBron James, he's a hell of a player, but he's no, like, as far as intrigue goes, he's no Dennis Rodman in terms of, like, spectacle and controversial nature and or a Mike Tyson or anything like that. He's not even close. He's just a really good basketball player that talks a lot. And that's it. Like, he's not like a superstar like those guys were. Or somebody like, I can't even like bring myself to hate him. Like, he's not even like, because Dennis Rodman I hated as a kid, but he was such a controversial figure. Mike Tyson could get people to hate his guts too, but that was part of their mystique and their appeal. And like sports aren't even as cool as they were back then. It's just a different time. It's just a completely different time. But the biggest thing to talk about with WCW Nitro during this period is obviously the rise of Goldberg, who became WCW's biggest superstar during this period. As he tore through guys left and right, the Goldberg squash match became a weekly attraction on Nitro, and it's a blast to watch because you could feel the fans getting more and more and more on his side as the weeks progressed. And by January, he's already one of the most over guys on the show. And his first big break comes when Raven wins the U.S. title, and then the next night on Nitro, he faces Goldberg. One of the most memorable matches in WCW Nitro history because, A, it's Goldberg's first title win, but also you get that memorable moment where where Raven tries to run away and the fans throw him back into the arena and basically fed him to Goldberg. And it's like, it was clear, it's like, God, the fans are all in on Goldberg, and he just won his first major title, and he is a legit superstar at this point. And Goldberg has a mystique to him. It's like, look, there are plenty of criticisms I could throw at Goldberg. He's limited as a worker. He's a one-trick pony. You could say all of those things, but there's a mystique there, and it's part of it's the look, part of it's the presentation, part of it's the way he carries himself in the ring. He doesn't have to talk about what a badass he is. You look at him and you sense it, you feel it, you believe it, and the fans do too. And it was just one of those magical things that absolutely worked. And I almost can't even explain why it worked. It just did. And I think part of what it was, and I'm going to try, and even though I just said I don't know if I can put it into words, I'm going to try to. Part of it was, with Goldberg, there was no bullshit in his matches. And what I mean by that, they weren't the typical formula matches where it's back and forth and trade finishers, which is mostly what you see now. Back and forth, go 15, 20 minutes, trade finishers, kick out of finishers, and then do whatever the finish is. During this period in WCW, there was a lot of NWO interference, and that was becoming immensely annoying in WCW programming. I talked about it in the last video for the latter half of 97, where that was when it was really starting to get grating, but that didn't happen with Goldberg. You got clean finishes every single time because he just mowed over people. So you get clean finishes, you get matches that look completely different from everything else on the show. He brings a different excitement and level of intrigue that nobody else does. To me, it's a no-brainer that he got pushed to the top. And again, fully acknowledging his limitations and any criticism thrown his way, it's easy to see how he got that push, at least to me. And actually, this period that I'm reviewing right now concluded with the final Nitro before the biggest Nitro in history in the Georgia Dome, where Goldberg would have the most legendary moment of his career. So I will cover that on the next video. But I think that concludes talking about this period of WCW Nitro's history. A lot of bad, a lot of good, but still an overall exciting show, and I would kill to have a show like this over modern-day programming for a multitude of reasons, because, again, there's a feeling and an energy to those late 90s wrestling shows, in WWF as well, not just WCW, that's just not there today. And I'm talking about, like, pre-COVID stuff, where I would love for wrestling to get this exciting and this cool again, but will it ever happen? I don't know. But in any case, let's close out this video by talking about the things that I always talk about. We're going to list an MVP during this period, a best match, and a best episode. So, let's start off with the MVP. I think the obvious answer for MVP is Goldberg. There's a few runners-ups. I think Chris Jericho deserves a lot of credit. I think Booker T deserves a lot of credit. I think Raven, DDP, even Sting while he was champion, and we were at least able to enjoy his title reign for a little bit. I think all of those are worthy of praise, but it's clear to me that Goldberg is the most over guy in WCW during this time, and is the most intriguing guy during this time. Even though there are a lot of performers that were doing well, and a lot of younger guys that were really coming up and making names for themselves, again, like Jericho, like Booker T, like, Scott Steiner wasn't a young guy, but you know what I mean. He was reinventing himself. But even with all that going on, I think Goldberg has to be the MVP during this period, and it would culminate just 1 week after this period, where he would have one of the biggest moments arguably the biggest moment in WCW history. Best match, it's actually a tie. I've got 3 answers for this one. One is Sting versus Diamond Dallas Page for the WCW World Heavyweight title. This was on the March 23rd episode in 1998, and is a great babyface match between two of WCW's biggest stars, I think. And I talked about this with Halloween Havoc 98 with Goldberg and DDP, where it was so refreshing to see because most main events were NWO versus WCW at this point. So to see like a straight up WCW match, even if it is a babyface match, is great to see. And it feels like entirely refreshing just all on its own. And to see Sting and DDP go out there and have this barn burner of a match on free TV, made for a very exciting one. Would have been great to save it for pay-per-view, but in any case, it is a very exciting match. And one where I really liked the finish, where Page had Sting in the corner, was going to pull him out of the corner with the diamond cutter, but Sting blocked it. I think he held onto the rope, blocked it, and then just turned it into Scorpion Death Drop and got the win. So, great match. Great early success for Diamond Dallas Page to indicate it's like, yeah, this guy can hang in a main event, so don't sleep on this guy. And was a terrific match, and one that I highly recommend watching. Other matches, we have the Benoit Booker Best of 7. Now, of the Best of 7, 3 of those matches happened on Monday Nitro. One on May 25th, 98. One on June 1st, 1998, and one on June 8th, 1998. I highly recommend checking out the entirety of the Booker Benoit Best of 7 series. I think it's fantastic. And the 3 matches on Nitro are definitely worth a look as well. Like I said, Benoit and Booker just tore it down every time they went up against each other. And I think any of the Best of 7 matches, going all the way up to their decisive battle at Great American Bash 98, I think is definitely worth a look, so be sure to check those out. And finally, I have another Chris Benoit match from the June 22nd episode, Bret Hart versus Chris Benoit. Just a nice wrestling match between 2 guys that can wrestle, and it's, as far as I can recall, it's the first time these 2 ever crossed paths, and we're able to have just a nice technical wrestling match with each other, which, what a novel concept. And, even though Bret Hart had been effectively ruined at this point, it was still a good match to see, and good to see that Bret Hart could still at least hold up his end of the bargain on the ringside state of things. Now, these 2 would go on to have another Nitro match. That was the Owen Hart Memorial match, which is probably the match that they've had together that they're most remembered for. I believe they also had what was that pay-per-view? It was Mayhem, where Bret Hart defeated Benoit to become the WCW champion in the tournament finals. I think I've got that right. I could be wrong. I don't know. But they would have a few other matches, but as far as I can recall, this was their first. And I think it's worth a look. I think it's a great match. So there are a lot of matches I enjoyed during this period. So again, even though I'm bashing a lot of the creative stuff that they did, there was a lot of good, exciting stuff going on as well. So actually, if I had to sum up this period, this is the period that really captured the WCW NWO Revenge on N64 period for WCW. If you've ever played that game, it was, at the time, it was considered the greatest wrestling game of all time. I still think the N64 wrestling games, the THQ Aki games, are the 4 best wrestling games of all time. That's WCW NWO vs. the World, WCW NWO Revenge, WWF WrestleMania 2000, and WWF No Mercy. 4 greatest wrestling games of all time. Nothing will ever change my mind, unless they start finding a way to recapture the magic of those games. But this period for WCW really captured the fun of playing WCW NWO Revenge on N64, and I mean that as the highest compliment. And best episode, this was a tough one, but I went with the March 23rd episode, the one that had the Sting DDP title match that I mentioned earlier, because it had 3 big main events: Sting versus DDP for the title, Giant versus Hogan and Nash in a handicap match, where the Giant was able to chokeslam Eric Bischoff, so that's always fun to see. And we get Piper versus Savage, a rare encounter between those 2 legends. Not that it was the greatest match in the world, but just for the sake of history, the fact that Piper versus Savage actually happened was very, very cool. And it also furthered the planting of the seeds for the Wolf Pack to come about and become a thing. So there was some storyline purpose to that. We also got Benoit versus Booker for the TV title, which was really kind of the start of their whole feud. It wasn't part of the Best of 7, but it was the start of their series of matches that would dominate WCW programming for the next little bit. The Eddie Chavo storyline developed, and this was another good thing that I enjoyed during 1998, where Eddie had kind of taken Chavo under his wing and was trying to mold him into the perfect Guerrero or whatever, and Chavo was being abused by Eddie, and then started to break away from Eddie's control. And I think there was a lot of good storyline development there. Chavo would suffer a loss to Ultimo Dragon, and Eddie would get a win over Kaz Hayashi to kind of show Chavo how it's done. We also get some antics from Chris Jericho, which is also great to see. And we also get that moment that I talked about earlier where Hennig and Rick Rude attacked the British Bulldog, and Bret Hart went out to save his brother-in-law, which should have planted the seeds for Bret Hart to eventually go after the NWO, have a big program with Kurt Hennig, and then eventually lead him to Hulk Hogan. Didn't happen, but hey, what can you do? But that concludes this Nitro retrospective and this period for WCW Monday Nitro 1998, the first half of 1998. Again, there was a lot to talk about here. There was a lot to unpack during this period. I think more happened, and there were more points of intrigue during this 6-month period than any other period in Nitro's history, which is saying a lot. But it's just like, it just felt like the show was just bombarding me with things, both good and bad. And I was really excited to do this video because I'm like, dude, there is a ton to cover here. And overall, the show's still exciting, but next time I do this Nitro retrospective, it will be the final one that I do as I cover the end of 1998 and will ultimately culminate with the first episode of 1999, the infamous Finger Poke of Doom, which to me spelled the end of the good old days and the end of the best years of WCW Monday Nitro, and pretty much spell the beginning of the end for the company as a whole. But that is all I have for you now. Once again, thank you everybody for watching. I appreciate the support. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment down below, hit the little bell icon so you get notified when I post new videos. But that is all I have for you now. Thanks again everybody for watching, and I will see you all later.